money matters. Anybody who works in politics knows that they need money to run a campaign.
When different groups are able to contribute millions of dollars to one candidate but not to the other, that's going to have an impact on election outcomes. And because money is so important in American elections, politicians will try to make sure they don't do anything that might cause their opponents to get lots of contribution.
I mean, money has a role in our politics. Again, you can't run for election without money.
In fact, money is so important that one of the main reasons for Biden's withdrawal from the presidential race was pressure from the top Democratic donors. When Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris started her presidential campaign as the new Democratic nominee, she raised more than $100 million in just 36 hours, a record according to her campaign. The amount of money spent during U.S. elections has also risen rapidly and consistently. In the 2020 elections, a total of $14 billion was spent, doubling the amount spent in 2016. Since 2000, more than 90% of the winning candidates in Congress have been those who spent the most money. The only exception to this came in 2010 when 86% of the top spenders secured House seats. Candidates need money to hire staff, advertise, organize rallies, and travel. A big chunk of money is spent on advertisements. For example, President Obama spent more than 70% of his campaign's funds on ads in the 2012 campaign.
Look at campaign commercials. That's where people get their news today. They don't take the time to go out and do their own homework. It's that 30-second, everyone's so busy that, I'm going to learn about Donald Trump through a 30-second ad, or I'm going to learn about Kamala Harris through a 30-second ad.
According to the Pew Research Center, the majority of Americans think that big donors have greater political influence and that there should be limits on campaign spending. The Federal Election Commission, which regulates elections in the United States, does limit spending by individual donors or political action committees in elections. However, the American Supreme Court views this differently. In the Supreme Court's view, limits on spending in elections are akin to curtailing the free speech rights of citizens. In its 2010 landmark Citizens United v. FEC judgment, the Supreme Court's majority ruled that free speech protections granted by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution give entities the right to spend an unlimited amount of money to support or oppose any candidate. This gave rise to super PACs, or independent expenditure-only committees, which can raise unlimited sums of money from corporations, unions, associations, and individuals. Unlike traditional PACs, they are prohibited from donating directly to any campaign or candidate, and their spending must not be coordinated with the candidate they benefit. They are also required to report their donors to the Federal Election Commission. The Supreme Court's verdict also gave rise to dark money in elections. Politically active nonprofits have also become a major force in federal elections over the last 3 cycles. Unlike PACs and super PACs, they don't need to disclose their donors, and they can raise and spend unlimited money.
I personally think it was a bad thing that money plays far too important a role in American elections and in American government more broadly. Though my own personal view is that Citizens United was actually a huge negative blow for American democracy.
I'm not a big fan of super PACs. I do think a lot of that is hidden money that is not reported.
This was a 21st century decision basically by the present conservative majority on the Supreme Court, which has been strengthened even more since that decision.
The decision that came from the conservative majority Supreme Court also benefited conservatives in politics. According to Open Secrets, a nonprofit organization that tracks and publishes data on campaign finance and lobbying, conservatives received 80% of spending by super PACs in the 2024 election cycle, while liberals received only 16%. The single largest spending came from a super PAC named Make America Great Again, a title that references Donald Trump's slogan. The committee is a single-candidate super PAC, meaning that all of the funds it raises go directly to Trump's campaign. Other super PACs are created for the sole purpose of opposing progressive candidates. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, has become synonymous with hardline, unconditional support of Israel, even at the expense of American interests. AIPAC was founded in 1954, and in the beginning, it did not spend money to support or oppose candidates. A super PAC called the United Democracy Project, launched by AIPAC in 2021, plans to spend $100 million in the 2024 elections to target progressive candidates, particularly Ilhan Omar, Summer Lee, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, and Cori Bush, who have opposed Israel's war on Gaza after October 7 attacks by Hamas, demanded immediate ceasefire and voiced to halt America's unconditional military support to Israel. In the 2022 midterms, AIPAC defeated the most progressive Jewish representative, Andy Levin, by spending $4 million in his primary. This group spent $2.3 million to defeat Congresswoman Summer Lee in her primary, but she survived in one of the closest races in the 2022 primaries. In the 2024 Democratic primaries, Congressman Jamal Bowman was targeted by UDP due to his pro-Palestine stance. AIPAC spent $20 million to unseat him successfully. They also successfully defeated Cori Bush after spending $10 million in her primary.
Israeli organization spent a lot of money to make sure she didn't win.
I happen to live in Ilhan Omar's district in Minnesota. I think she will survive. I think she will prevail. That's my prediction. I could be wrong, but I think she will. And Tlaib, I think, probably also will prevail. Cori Bush in St. Louis might be in more trouble.
What these groups are trying to do, what these pro-Israel super PACs are trying to do, is make an example of these people. If they can drive a couple of them out of office, then it sends a warning to everybody else, people who might want the United States to have a more intelligent Middle East policy, might want the United States to be putting more pressure on Israel, say over Gaza. Anybody who's thinking they might want to do that and then they see someone else defeated with a flood of, pro-Israel money coming into the election is likely to think twice about doing it.
In America, money not only plays a role during election campaigns but also influences lawmakers in Congress through lobbying activities. An analysis by The Guardian revealed that Congress members who supported the Gaza war also received the most donations from pro-Israel donors. Don Bacon received about $250,000 from pro-Israel groups and offered absolute support for Israel. Lobbying is now a massive industry worth $4 billion. With Washington's K Street as its headquarters and 13,000 people employed in this industry. 73% of Americans think lobbies have too much influence on their elected officials. Sometimes, a very slim majority influences crucial state policy making. Around 40,000 Americans die each year due to gun violence. Despite that, efforts to regulate the arms industry fail due to opposition from specific interest groups.
Most Americans favor a wide range of legal regulations on firearms that never happen. And some people find it puzzling, why should majority opinion not prevail? It's partly because, it's basically because a small number of people are very, very intense in their commitment to the other side of the question. There are a larger number of people who favor regulations, but they don't care about the issue so intensely, and they're not single-mindedly devoted to it.
After the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting, multiple efforts were made to legislate gun control and background checks at the federal level, but those attempts failed in the U.S. Senate. Republicans oppose regulations on guns and have close links with the gun lobby. During the 2012 efforts to regulate guns, spending by pro-gun groups increased by 150%. In 2016, the National Rifle Association, NRA, spent $54 million to support Donald Trump and other Republican candidates. In the same year, its spending surged by $100 million.
The people who are very devoted to what they call gun rights, meaning keeping the acquisition and use of firearms relatively unrestricted and unregulated, they provide support to politicians who agree with them, both with money and with votes. And I think you have to understand how those two pieces of the puzzle fit together. It is the money, but it's not just the money. It's also that this is an interest that's highly organized at a popular level, and they can mobilize really significant numbers of people to vote based only on that issue. The politicians value the dollars, but they value the votes just as much, and they get both of them.
In America, pro-Israel lobby groups are also very active. AIPAC was founded in 1954, and in the beginning, it did not spend money to support or oppose candidates.
There were campaign contributions from supporters of Israel, not from AIPAC, because AIPAC didn't contribute money at that time. It only started doing so about 2 years ago.
Despite that, it had so much influence that one of its officials, while having dinner with a journalist, claimed that they could secure signatures from 70 senators on a napkin within 24 hours. However, when it started financing candidates, it intended to eliminate almost all critics of Israel from Congress, and it has followed up on that threat by spending millions of dollars in each of their districts through its super PAC, the United Democracy Project.
They're trying to instill a certain degree of fear in lots of other politicians, so those politicians won't cross them either.
AIPAC projects itself as a bipartisan group, but in recent years, most of its support has aligned with the GOP. It is the biggest source of donations for Republicans in the most competitive Democratic primaries. AIPAC has labeled Congresswoman Ilhan Omar as pro-terrorist but endorsed the vast majority of candidates who voted to overturn the 2020 elections on January 6. J Street, another pro-Israel but more moderate lobbying group, has accused AIPAC of undermining American democracy. Due to these lobbying efforts, America continues to support Israel diplomatically, financially, and strategically. It has vetoed dozens of UN resolutions, challenged and criticized international courts, damaged its image on the world stage, and spent billions of dollars unconditionally to aid Israel, contrary to the wishes of the general public, who prefer conditions on this aid.
All of these things would not be happening if groups like AIPAC were not as influential as they are, and if American politicians weren't worried about being perceived as insufficiently supportive of Israel. I think that's true in both parties, less so in Democrats now than in Republicans, but that's just the most obvious recent example of how the United States has had a one-sided approach towards Israel, where we provide it with very generous support, and we do that more or less unconditionally. It doesn't really matter what Israel does, it's still going to get help from the United States.
Compared to citizens of other wealthy countries, an average American spends double the amount on healthcare. In 2023, pharmaceutical industries spent $747 million on lobbying. At the beginning of 2023, when U.S. lawmakers were investigating the role of pharmacy benefit managers in the rising cost of healthcare and crucial drugs, these groups doubled their spending on lobbying. Peter Ubel, a physician and behavioral scientist at Duke University, blames the power of lobbying by this industry for the staggering healthcare costs in the United States. The healthcare lobby is so powerful in the U.S. that 4 of the top 7 industry lobbyists are from this sector. In 2022, most U.S. industries lobbied for the Inflation Reduction Act, which directs billions of dollars, including tax incentives, into clean energy technology. It was an effort to decrease carbon emissions. It was unfavorable to the oil industry. Senator Joe Manchin had a swing vote in Congress, and the bill was amended based on his suggestions. It required the government to auction oil and gas leases before starting wind and solar projects, a demand from the oil industry that had been suspended by the Biden administration. Senator Joe Manchin received around $1 million from the oil and gas industry and has ties to a family coal business. For years, the tech industry distanced itself from lobbying and involvement in politics. However, after complaints of privacy violations in 2021, revelations of lack of transparency by whistleblower Frances Haugen, the Capitol riots on January 6, and the blocking of Trump on social media platforms, both parties converged on the same agenda: to curtail the power of tech giants. Eventually, Meta founder Mark Zuckerberg and other industry heavyweights faced long congressional hearings and harsh questioning about unlimited power of tech companies from Congress members. As a result, tech companies began spending money on politics. A record $70 million were spent in 2021 on lobbying by Meta, Amazon, Google, TikTok, and other companies to prevent any critical legislation.
We have not done anything to update our privacy laws in this country, our federal privacy laws. Nothing, zilch, in any major way. Why? Because there are lobbyists around every single corner of this building that have been hired by the tech industry. We have done nothing when it comes to making the algorithms more transparent, allowing for the university research that you referred to. Why? Because Facebook and the other tech companies are throwing a bunch of money around this town and people are listening to them.
In 2022, when the U.S. Congress failed to pass legislation that would have opened the door for third-party payment systems and barred self-preferencing, opposition from tech giants, including Amazon, Apple, and Meta, played a key role. These companies spent tens of millions of dollars on federal lobbying that year. After the launch of ChatGPT in 2022, competition among Google, Microsoft, Meta, and OpenAI intensified, and experts around the globe began demanding regulations on AI. While publicly these companies supported such regulations, according to Time magazine, in closed-door meetings with congressional officers, they were less supportive of certain regulations. They also increased their lobbying efforts, which reached new heights in 2023. The number of groups lobbying the federal government on AI nearly tripled from 2022 to 2023, soaring from 158 to 451 organizations. These lobbying groups not only influence elected officials, as it is considered comparatively easy, but they also install their sympathizers in the executive branch.
So there have been people associated with AIPAC and other groups in the lobby who've then gone to work in the State Department or gone to work at the White House. Donald Trump's ambassador to Israel was a prominent supporter of the settler movement in Israel as well. So a lobby can succeed not just by influencing people on Capitol Hill, but also by having people who are sympathetic to its views holding key positions in the executive branch. Again, that's not unique to, say, the Israel lobby. That's something that all lobbying groups would love to have. They'd like to have someone, in the Department of Labor, in the Treasury, in different parts of the executive branch in order to advance their particular interests.
Billionaires like Elon Musk are leveraging their resources to sway elections. Elon Musk has been a consistent supporter of the right wing in the United States. Since acquiring Twitter, which he renamed X, Musk has used the platform to promote his right-wing views and openly back Donald Trump. Recently, he launched a super PAC, contributing millions of dollars to Republicans. Through his America PAC, he is also gathering voter information to give Republicans an advantage in swing states. With the power of his privately owned social media platform and super PAC, Musk has become highly influential in American politics. According to an analysis of 200 corporations by the Sunlight Foundation, by spending $5.8 billion on federal lobbying, these companies received $4.4 trillion in federal business and support. However, Paul Miller thinks differently.
The argument that money buys everything is just not accurate today. You can look at how much corporate America is spending and now argue that they're not getting their money's worth if that is the fact, because they're spending, hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases. But are they getting everything they want? No.
In July this year, New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez was found guilty of accepting bribes to help foreign governments. If money in politics is the problem, what's the solution then?
They could create a publicly funded system of elections.
Why should my tax dollars go to support a candidate I have zero interest and zero appeal to?
Paul Miller also says that without money, there will be more corruption.
For me, if you didn't have money in politics, it's going to make it even more corrupt because people are going to do it behind the scenes and they're going to take it in the dark and you're never going to see it.
While many people say that lobbying should be eliminated entirely, Dr. Walt has a different point of view.
Sometimes lobbying groups, I think, do have positive effects. Certainly, if you agree with the positions of a lobby, you want it to be as influential as possible. So if I'm in favor, say, of arms control, I'm glad that there are lobbying groups that try to influence members of Congress or senators or an administration to adopt policies that support arms control. Lobbies may have really positive effects. Among other things, they can provide information to politicians. They can bring them talking points. They help actually sometimes draft legislation. And they're going to do that in a way that tries to favor their interests. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad policy or bad recommendations.
Lobbying groups wield significant influence in the United States, particularly as they prepare to play a substantial role in the upcoming elections in November and beyond. While they are often perceived negatively, as if lobbyists are simply bribing legislators and officials with briefcases full of cash, the reality is more nuanced. Lobbyists can have both positive and negative impacts. It is essential to regulate them to ensure they serve the public interest rather than being co-opted by corporate entities.
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions is somehow that we walk around with large cash bags of money and we just drop them off in members of Congress and we get our way. Again, I don't think people have been paying attention to it because not a lot's been getting done. So the whining and dining that people see is more what I will call a myth. It does happen, yes, but not to the extent that people think.